Tej, I think it's safe to say Seth will say yes and round out War Games 5-on-5. We've been talking about it as obviously a distinct possibility bordering on inevitable based on the story they're telling. And tonight, Seth said no again under no uncertain terms. But the main event, as we predicted last week, even before spoilers were out, and I avoided spoilers, so just for the record, guessed it without spoilers. That it's not a big achievement. The Reed Seth match was happening on Raw, not Survivor Series, so they could do an angle that would set up Seth going, "I've had it with a bloodline. I'll team with Roman, even if it means putting him back in power. He's a tyrant, but I got to get my hands on the bloodline." You can hear the promo to set it up next week. What'd you think of the way they told the story this week? Kind of weaved again another pitch from Sami and the Usos, Seth turning him down, the match. The bloodline interfering, Solo distracting Seth at the end when Seth looked like he was on the verge of victory. And then Reed, because of that distraction, gets a win over Seth.
I mean, it's a tried and true Triple H booking staple at this point of, when a solo competitor gets dragged into faction business, they wind up picking a side. They can't just leave well enough alone. We saw essentially the same thing happen that drew Jey Uso back into the bloodline several weeks ago. And I don't think it's at the point where it's become a cliche yet or it's become old. I think that it's a means to an end. I think Seth himself is a great choice if they are committed to doing a 5-on-5 War Games build, which it seems like they are. I had no complaints. Obviously, Roman and Seth is, for my money, the biggest drawing match that WWE really has in the chamber between two active members of the roster. And if this is a means to an end to eventually get us there, I have no problems with it. The interactions between Roman and Seth, if Seth does wind up saying yes, which it's looking increasingly likely like that's where they're going to go, are going to be absolutely captivating television. And I'm very, very excited to see their hopefully face-to-face in the coming weeks. Wade, I think you're muted.
Has Seth made too good of a case against teaming with Roman? I mean, does he seem like a hypocrite going, I don't want to help this guy get back in power? I mean, obviously winning War Games doesn't put someone in power. We're not supposed to think that hard about it. But, Seth has been very firm and made a good argument. Why would I want to help this guy?
You know what? As much as I hate the cop-out of that's just kind of wrestling logic,
yeah,
it is just, it's an abbreviated version of a real-life reconciliation where if one party has made their case clear that they have changed their ways, and we are starting to see a little bit of contrition, a little bit of introspection from Roman in, the past few episodes of SmackDown and of Raw.
Right.
I can suspend my disbelief just enough for it to be a plausible thing for Seth Rollins to do. I do think that they are stretching, the believability of the situation just a little bit, but that just comes with the territory when you establish that long-term character motivations and interactions do matter. Personally, I don't have a problem with it, but I hope that they don't lean too far into Roman and Seth truly being on the same page after the years upon years of animosity that they've had, irrespective of their face heel alignments.
And do you see what's this a means to? Because they could have done 4-on-4. They could have done 5-on-5 with somebody else other than Seth and Reed. They came up with this that, we're just going on the assumption that's where this is heading. It's not official, but it's obviously we can talk about it as if it is. You said hopefully they don't act all chummy, but what's this a means to? Is it a means to an end of setting up Roman and Seth in the short term? Is it they coexist, but they plant some seeds for something for 2026 or SummerSlam 2025 or something like that? Or what?
I don't think it's as simple as just a team up and yet another example of one of Roman's former enemies now being on the same page as him. A, because we did that with Cody at Bad Blood. We run the risk of that pattern getting a little repetitive. Mm-hmm. And B, because there's one wrinkle to this build that I feel like people are forgetting about, and that's Roman making a call to the wise man Paul Heyman, or attempting to.
Yeah.
That was a show-long tease, which makes me think it's not a small detail. Why would calling Heyman be so important in the build-up to War Games if Seth Rollins is going to be the fifth member? Because Heyman, as much as we'd all love for it to happen, he's not getting in the ring. So that means he has a link to someone who would. Heyman and Seth don't have any interactions. That leaves, only a few options. CM Punk being the most likely, Braun Breaker being a wild card choice. As much as it would make sense for Brock Lesnar, kayfabe-wise, given their history, I don't think that's going to happen, just given the controversies around him. But I'd like to think that little thread will not be forgotten and will be used to pay off something. And you can only pay that off if Seth Rollins does not fill that gap of a fifth man. So I would like to believe there's a little bit more nuance to the situation than a repeat of Sami Zayn joining the Bloodline, being reluctant and then eventually giving in service of fighting a bigger enemy.
Yeah.
Hopefully this isn't the same build twice in a row.
Yeah, I think they are cognizant of the possibility this will feel too similar. They put so much into Seth saying no, 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 and then the Bloodline costing him this match against a heated rival in Reed. I don't think it's going to be as simple as Seth just says, Solo distracted me. I lost to Reed as a result. I still don't want to team with Roman. And that's I don't think that's the way they get out of Seth being in War Games and they end up with someone Heyman picks. So that means an angle of some kind that takes Seth out or what? I just feel like they put too much into building up to the grand moment where Seth gives in and Sami says, you won't regret this. So the call to Heyman maybe feels more like Roman just needing someone to talk to because he's so stressed out and torn and feeling, I don't know if remorse is the word, but introspective about his past actions. So it's go back to the wise man. So just tell me about that a little more. What do you think are other options if it's not just Heyman going, don't do Seth. Let's go with a surprise friend. You won't believe who it is. And it's, people speculate Lesnar, they'll speculate Punk, they'll speculate Breaker, maybe another Samoan. Tej, what do you think?
Lord knows we've got about 20 of them waiting in the wings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it winds up not being Seth, my intuition tells me that it's because Seth will be written off with an injury angle. The reason is because if Seth voluntarily chooses not to join the original Bloodline, just by the nature of the dynamics of the Bloodline storyline, that'll make Seth lean heel in the eyes of the audience. And yet again, this is another byproduct of the Bloodline storyline being so all-encompassing. They've done a heel turn with a very similar subject matter with Kevin Owens. And I don't foresee Rollins turning heel so close to WrestleMania when it feels like Raw needs more babyfaces than they have.
Right.
So I think that we are going to see either Seth Rollins joins the cut and dry storytelling method, which would be consistent with Triple H. He doesn't like to swerve out of nowhere, at least less so than his predecessor, or Seth gets written off, which, it's clear he still has some lingering injuries. He gets a couple month break, and then he returns potentially on the first episode of Raw on Netflix in a couple of months.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm not ruling out that Reigns not getting a hold of Heyman isn't drawn out for another month.
Mm-hmm.
That Heyman just doesn't factor into War Games, and it's a separate plot line. They're not going to forget it. It's a huge moment. I mean, they ended SmackDown with it for a reason, but Roman still can't get a hold of Heyman, and they turn that into a big mystery that is actually a ratings hook for Netflix in January. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of different cards they can play. They know what they're going to do. This is not something they're making up as they go along. So it's more be along for the ride and have confidence that they've got a pretty good idea of what they're doing and the pace at which they're doing it. Let's pause and formally introduce ourselves and then move on to more conversation about this and other topics from Raw. This is the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling Post Show for Monday, November 18th, 2024. I'm Wade Keller, host of the show, the editor, publisher, and founder of Pro Wrestling Torch, the long-running paper copy, mail-delivered newsletter, and also the website, PWTorch.com, approaching its 25th anniversary since it launched. And also the host of various podcasts, the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling Post Shows. We stream live on YouTube and then provide the podcast version on our podcast feed. Search Wade Keller to subscribe. to our podcasts. The red logo pops up. That's the post shows. When you search Wade Keller, you also see a blue logo. That's our podcast only, audio only flagship and other features of Wade Keller podcast. Tomorrow, the flagship will feature the return of Zach Haydorn, who is now of Sports Illustrated and Brass Ring Media, former PWTorch assistant editor, joining me for a big picture discussion about a big couple weeks coming up with WWE and AEW both putting on big shows. So send your emails for the flagship now. Topic suggestions, rants, questions. Wade Keller Podcast at PWTorch.com. Wade Keller Podcast at PWTorch. Excuse me, Wade Keller Podcast at gmail.com. Old habits die hard. Wade Keller Podcast at gmail.com. And we'll look for your email, and maybe you'll be part of the flagship. We'll record that tomorrow afternoon. That'll go up for VIP members and everybody else also tomorrow, later in the day. So hit refresh on that. So yeah, we're here to talk Raw, and we've got our chat open here on YouTube. We'll read chat comments from people who are watching us live. You can also email the show, wadekellerpodcast at gmail.com. And if you're a VIP member or Patreon supporter, you can go and look for the caller code and be part of tonight's show as a caller, audio only, if you turn off your camera or leave your camera on, and join us on screen. I think that covers the basics. So let's introduce tonight's co-host, Tej Narayanan. Oh, I had it. I stumbled. Say
Go for it. Go for it. You got it.
Try it. All right. Narayanan. Nope, I can't. I'm tongue-tied. I got you the last two times. Say it for me.
Tej Narayanan. Hello, everyone. My name is Tej. You may recognize me as the writer of the SmackDown Feud Tracker column. Every Friday, we break down all the feuds currently going on over on the Blue Brand in advance of that night's episode of Friday Night SmackDown. So if you find yourself needing a refresher on the product, or you just absolutely love breaking down feuds, come hang out with me. But today, I'm here breaking down Raw, and I'm very, very happy to be here. As always, it's so great to see you guys.
Good to have you back, Tej. For the record, it was a pre-taped Raw. And I was expecting and received more video packages. That said, I don't think it just jumped off the screen as this was pre-taped. If you weren't, if you're just a casual viewer, there was a lot of fresh on-camera in-ring content. But as Derek Hubbard says in the chat, initially I thought it was a foregone conclusion. The original. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong comment. Here it is. Derek goes, props to WWE for making sure the show did not feel like a canned taped show. They provided more storyline developments than a typical taped show. It felt live and important. I think it's important if you want to sustain viewership for taped shows, you want to have storyline developments. And yeah, I mean, Rhea Ripley showing up, big deal. Was a big deal. You could imagine them, in thinking we should make that live and not let word spread, but it's a way for people to tune in too if word spreads. Like, I got to see this. Tej, do you agree with Derek that this felt not canned or taped and had more news than or enough news to seem like a regular Raw?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the strength of the WWE fan base at this point in time, where they can sustain a however many hours, 4 or 5 hour taping, and still maintain the level of investment that the audience had on tonight's episode. And there were definitely a few entrances that felt a little quieter than usual, and you could sense the crowd was running a little ragged. But by and large, the fact that, second episode concurrently being taped, you get a huge reveal in the episode with Rhea Ripley coming back, and the crowd still feels like it's going insane. It's a testament to just how long the product has maintained the level of quality and the willingness to know what fans want and engineer that level of moments. So I do agree with Derek. I think that this episode did not have any extremely obvious tells that it was taped, beyond, of course, a few big debuts happening potentially earlier in the show than they ordinarily would have, but then again, you can never really tell.
Yeah. Mike Good in the chat says, good show, especially since it was pre-taped. Part of the aspect of it being pre-taped was we got a Miz narrated video with Karen Cross, and then also a Wyatt 6 video with actually just Bo Dallas, maskless, talking with a close-up. I like this quite a bit. I thought Bo Dallas, without the mask, he shouldn't be hiding behind an expressionless mask, as kind of cool as it is, and maybe it's merchandise that inspires him or whatever. I like Bo Dallas in this role when he's given a chance to just talk. He had a convincing look to him as he delivered his message. Tej, just tell me what you thought of the 2 video packages that continued that storyline, and really broadly, how do you feel about the storyline since we last talked?
I think it's one of the biggest mid-card storylines that I find myself getting more and more into each week. I think it's fair to say that following their initial program with American Made, benching the Wyatt Six did cool them off in the eyes of a lot of the audience. Not to mention, it feels like they were backing down from the more macabre, violent tendencies that they had in their first few appearances. And they felt like we were about to see the same thing that we saw with, the original Eater of Worlds gimmick with Bray Wyatt, that very slowly but surely this once all-encompassing force was going to be neutered. I still do think a little bit of that did happen, but I found myself getting more and more invested in the Wyatt Six as faces because now they have a clearer agenda to remind those who have been selfish the dangers of giving up family. And of course, I think they finally found their perfect foil with The Miz, who has the ability to be smarmy and hateable unlike any other. And just the fact that he's able to do that, even at the living legend status of his career, to truly make the audience hate him, it's a testament to just how, oh yeah, pun right there, a testament to just how talented he is. Karrion Kross has finally found
or how naturally unlikable
best.
Or how naturally unlikable Mike Mizanin is. Sorry, I just had to slip that in. And I'm joking that it's not acting. It's just people don't like him no matter what. But go ahead.
Oh, of course. It is crazy to me, though, that Mike Mizanin, the man, is probably an absolute sweetheart, but he can play someone so rude and self-important so well. It is such a shame that, we got a little Marine tease, which was very nice. Those movies are terrible, but it is crazy to think that Mike Mizanin never really had a serious go at being a Hollywood actor, because he could play a gaslighting, toxic villain and run circles around so many actors in Hollywood, in my personal opinion. Karrion Kross as well. I think he's finally found an angle that really feels engaging, and it's a great way to legitimize any face that turns heel, because, you can just say, oh, they're not being themselves. Karrion Kross is just in their ear, gaslighting them, corrupting them. And, we saw that both with The Miz and with Xavier Woods. And just the fact that Xavier Woods, after nearly 10 years of being one of the most likable, smiling baby faces, this heel turn feels plausible. And a lot of it is in part because we have Karrion Kross lording over the storyline, pulling the strings. So I'm fully on board with everything the Final Testament is doing right now. And if you told me that would be the case at WrestleMania, I would have told you were being crazy.
Yeah. No, this is the best use of Karrion Kross. Miz is obnoxious in that video in a way that makes you want to boo him. The Bo Dallas performance is really strong. Brock Benningfield in the chat says, Bo is a mirror image of Bray. You can't help but hear and see him in Bo. Chris Johnson in the chat said, Bo had a different intensity tonight. I liked it. Darrell Freeman says, Kross needs this just as much as Wyatt Six need this angle to work, and these promos are helping. So definitely some thumbs up here and from the chat and us on this. Bo Dallas said the trust of the innocent is a liar's most useful tool. Sometimes Aleister Black and I mean Bray Wyatt, we've had kind of word salads, and it's just different platitudes and cliches that kind of don't add up to a lot, and it can get kind of annoying and tiring. But that's a good quote. The trust of the innocent is a liar's most useful tool. I think we all just think, yeah, there's something to that. We see that in a lot of walks of life, politics, sales, whatever. Cynical people could come up with a long list of things, and they might not be wrong. So he said that he tried to warn him, but he damned himself. I'm sorry for what happens next. You chose this. I never wanted this. And the delivery is just, it's so good. I mean, close-ups of Bo Dallas talking in that tone with that raspy voice. Yeah, it was good. Junaid says the Bo Dallas Wyatt segment wasn't just nonsense, a step in the right direction. Brock Benningfield adds, WWE did it. They made Kross interesting. So yeah, I mean, this is good. It is mid card. It doesn't mean Bo Dallas can't eventually do something higher up on the card, but there's no need to rush it. Let him establish that he can follow in Bray's footsteps in a credible way, find his own voice as a sequel to that, and not look inferior, just different and perhaps in its own way. Now, I won't say better, but perhaps in its own way on the level of what Bray does. And he's got to put a body of work together to show that. Bray Wyatt was amazing in the Firefly Funhouse persona and so much of what he did, even if, as Paul Levesque talked about in the documentary on Bray, sometimes it was tough to rein him in to something that could pay off in the ring. Maybe Bo will be better at that. I'm not ruling out Bo Dallas and his crew can't move up the card. I still want to see more development of his support crew, though. They got brief little vignettes, and I mean, I just want to know more about their motivation. I think, Wade Barrett, threw something out there about them, made some comment about the rest of his crew. I can't remember the phrase he used, but it's like I think the group will be better if people care about more than just Bo. But step in the right direction tonight, no doubt. Bo Dallas without the mask, cutting a good promo. Tej, anything else you want to add to that?
I think, especially in this feud for the first time, I really do feel like the baggage of the Firefly Funhouse is working against the Wyatt Six and their presentation rather than with it. The concept of Dexter Lumis, Joe Gacy, Nikki Cross, and Rowan being hampered by having to live up to the clearly defined personas of the Firefly Funhouse characters. In a way, it's almost taking away from the fact that these are meant to be new characters. In addition to the very clear delineation that there is nothing supernatural about this act, it muddled the presentation early on in a way that did not do the Wyatt Six any favors. And when the least captivating part of the Wyatt Six is Uncle Howdy, which was originally the foundation of the entire act, it speaks a lot to the Bray Wyatt-ness, the supernatural, the word salad aspect of it all kind of clashing with the more emotionally intense message of being betrayed and anger at those who have been rude and taken advantage of others. And it's a balance that I think they've come a lot closer to finding but I don't think they're quite there yet.
Yes. Okay. Let's go back to the Bloodline storyline for a moment, because I marked a couple chats here. Derek Hubbard said, initially I thought it was a foregone conclusion the original Bloodline would prevail, but given the fact they delayed the reappearance of Heyman, I believe this will be a victory for the new Bloodline. And he adds, the reappearance of Wise Men will be the missing ingredient for Roman to defeat the Rogue Bloodline. So that plays into me saying I think maybe we don't get Heyman between now and Survivor Series. They play that up into the Netflix era, and build to a big moment. And Heyman would be the missing ingredient. Darrell said, also, wouldn't Paul give Roman some type of advice to help point him in a direction? You don't want that to happen if Roman loses. You want Heyman to point him to win, assuming Heyman's going to be with Roman. Maybe Heyman cut off his number and is upset with Roman because Roman, they hugged at the end of WrestleMania, but then he ghosted him and he resents him for it. There is incentive for Heyman to abandon Roman and perhaps suddenly become a spokesperson for Solo. I mean, the pieces are in place for that, Tej. I wouldn't rule that out. Would you?
My question for you, actually, Wade, is if War Games does not end with an original Bloodline win, what do you think is the next kind of immediate end game to build to between the old and the new Bloodline, where Heyman would eventually figure in? Would that be a Roman and Solo singles match at WrestleMania? Does that lead to The Rock coming back? And the reason I point that out is going back to the Honorary Uce arc, it was always implied that the finale of that arc would be WrestleMania 39. It would be Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens winning the tag titles against the Usos, and originally we all thought it would mean the end of Roman's reign. History changed that, of course, but that was the original idea. And while WWE hasn't pointed us as strongly in the same direction, they certainly haven't stopped the audience from going continually back to Survivor Series this year and saying this is all eventually leading to old Bloodline versus new Bloodline at Survivor Series. So there hasn't been a lot of focus on what happens after that, and I'm curious what you think that is.
Well, we got some moments with Roman and Solo and Roman and Jacob Fatu. So I think they could incorporate something into the Royal Rumble. There could be something for Saturday night's main event. They're going to want to, get a very good rating on NBC. And so, they want that to be a PLE caliber tradition. We'll see how it holds up. Certainly, it'll do better than Battle of the Belts in AEW, which became just a, skippable C show pretty quickly. So we could see Roman against Solo at Saturday's main event, Roman against Jacob Fatu at Royal Rumble, and then things really kick up right before, during, or right after that with Paul Heyman. That then, yes, takes us into Roman and Rock showing up. I presume with the new bloodline, and so, Final Boss hangs out with the, with the established new bloodline. And I don't know. Yeah. So, I don't have something just super mapped out and specific, but to me, that's plenty to map things out and fill time between now, Sunday's main event, Rumble, and WrestleMania. Go ahead and add to that or respond to that. Yeah,
absolutely. But on the flip side, I don't know if this is me believing this will happen or if it's genuinely just something I want to happen. The possibility of exploring a Paul Heyman babyface turn is just too tantalizing to not really follow up on. So I'm hoping against hope this doesn't lead to a swerve where he goes with the new bloodline, because Paul Heyman, the man with decades of the most despicable actions within the world of the WWE, managed to get a babyface pop right before being written off. And I would love to see what a babyface Heyman looks like, no matter who he's with.
And it doesn't have to be permanent. If Roman stays babyface, Heyman's babyface for a while, and then, he manages Braun Breaker, for instance, starting a year from now, or is part of a CM Punk heel turn to bring CM Punk to a different level of relevance, or just frame him differently if kind of the babyface persona wears off. I don't think it's an accident how much they bonded at the Hall of Fame speech and drew attention to Punk and his kids. I think it was the first time his kids were on camera and they were by Punk. So, I don't think that was done just due to personal history. I think it was probably storyline seed planting also. So we'll see. But the crowd, as Brock Bedingfield says, the crowd's going to be fully behind Paul Heyman when he returns, which actually could backfire on Roman. I mean, if Heyman turned on Roman, the fans might cheer Heyman over Roman. I mean, I wouldn't even rule that out. I think people really, there is that sort of meta real life respect for the OG Heyman, ECW, everything that he's brought on and off camera. Jirai says in the chat, Heyman is a man. So, people feel that way, and it's dangerous to not give the fans their moment to cheer Heyman and Roman together. And I don't see a super compelling reason to delay that or mess with it. I think fans want it. Give it to them, and you can always turn Heyman heel down the line, or if Roman just retires, just walks away, other than, even more infrequent special appearances. Heyman, I know Heyman's told people he's not done. Like, he's nowhere near done. This isn't like, oh, when Roman's done, I'm done. Like, Heyman wants to be around for on and off camera, it sounds like, for years to come. So he's already got his eye on what he's going to do next. Ronda Rousey's gone. Who knows with Brock? The Roman bloodline stuff, he's in the midst of, but it won't last forever. So, there's CM Punk and Braun Breaker seem like the most likely two scenarios. Okay, another comment. This is Al Archer in the chat. Is there any way The Rock becomes part of the story that doesn't feel forced? He makes so much sense as part of the family, but the timing always feels off. Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. From a personal enjoyment of WWE standpoint, I don't care if Rock ever shows up on WWE TV again. I mean, I've kind of soured on him as a performer. There's something up, and I get he's a huge star. I mean, no question he's a huge star. I'm not saying it's best for business. I'm not saying if my money was on the line, I would do this. I'm just saying, as a viewer, I'm totally fine with the current wrestlers doing their thing. And there's a little bit of resentment over with me over what happened with Cody. There's something very natural that the fans wanted, and Rock came in and was like, "Oh, I'm a bigger star," and outright admitted. I think in that YouTube documentary, there was Cody's story is going to satisfy the existing fans, but The Rock, being part of this, will bring in other people, take things to another level. That's what he believes. He's not wrong, but WWE's doing really well with their fan base. Like, this is not someone, we don't need a hero to come in and take WWE to the next level. And so Rock does sort of feel like he's just messing things up. And I don't know. I don't think his performances have been honestly that good most of the time. I think the whole thing with Cody and the stadium, and I'm not saying it was Rock's idea. I think Heyman is great, but maybe it was Heyman's idea. I don't know, but I thought that was just overwrought and over the top. And yeah, just too much production wise. And so I'm okay if Rock doesn't come back, but Rock's coming back. So back to the question from Al Larcher, is there a way to not make it feel forced? Because when Rock shows up, he does kind of cast a big shadow. He kind of Bigfoots, steals the scene. And suddenly, if you've got momentum with everything else going on, Rock shows up and Dwayne Johnson's going to make it about himself. And that's going to be his primary concern. He doesn't have to. Some people at his level of success might be more gracious and want to get assists on goals instead of scoring the goals, but to use my NHL analogy, but he seems to want to be a goal scorer. So yeah, your thoughts, Tej.
I mean, I completely agree. I can't put my finger on it, but something about Rock in the current WWE product, there's something obtrusive about his presence. And maybe that's because of too much of the behind the scenes leaking out with the WrestleMania 40 situation, because while that was still a great build, you could sense that something different was supposed to happen, and WWE managed to salvage it and turn it into a really interesting product. I think my feelings about Rock coming back definitely veered a little bit into reluctance following the Bad Blood tease. He comes out after the end of the main event, and if I'm not mistaken, there's been barely any mention of it since. It doesn't feel like it's leading to an immediate follow-up. It feels like having Dwayne Johnson there because he demands a main event moment. And I don't want to conjecture on what Dwayne Johnson's asking for behind the scenes, if he deserves it or not, but it feels like it's an attempt to jam the square peg that is the Bloodline story right now into a round hole. And while I do think the end result will not be bad, I think that for it to not feel forced, it will require Dwayne to be relegated to a position that's more in the background than he would like, or that makes sense from a purely monetary perspective.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, there's these great chefs creating great meals for all the constituents in the restaurant in the back, and then the celebrity chef shows up and says, I've got an idea. And it's like, the food's already ready. We've got half of the meal served. The customers are loving what we served. Why we don't need you, like, just go away. If I felt and if I heard that it was congenial, that everybody just loved Dwayne. He showed up and he's just a regular everyday guy, no a posse of people, no demands, no bigfooting and big shotting people. And he's like, how can I fit in? If that was what I heard, I would have a different attitude, but that's not what I hear, and that's not his reputation outside of WWE these days either. And I don't know how anyone can have the life that Dwayne Johnson has had and not end up losing touch with how to be a regular human being, how to be a regular sort of decent, affable person who isn't just paranoid constantly that people are out to get you or that the success is just going to go away. I mean, that I'm sympathetic in that sense. I don't know how many people. I mean, some people handle it really well, but it's not damning that you don't, with all the pressure and all the success and all the people coming at him. And you never know who a true friend is anymore. When you reach his level of success, you feel so alone because everybody is just gloming onto you because you're a celebrity. So those excuses kind of built in doesn't change the fact that I'd be happy if he went away, and I'd be softer on him if I heard that he handled these things better. So that said, obviously, Rock on Netflix, Rock on SmackDown on USA, Rock part of WrestleMania. He's still a huge star. And it's going to be, a boosted out of business in certain ways, even if it gets in the way of some other things. But hopefully they're kind of maybe getting better at working out how to work with him, and he's getting a little more of a sense because he had to create a whole documentary to try to save face after what he did a year ago. So maybe he's going to come in a little more humble, or maybe send his people in ahead of time to read the room a little bit. We'll see. I mean, maybe it'll work out better this time. But ultimately, as Brock Benningfield asks, does Rock get one of the WrestleMania main events? Does Cena? I'm not quite ready to get into predict WrestleMania main event mode right now. I think we got a lot to go between now. Let's get past the Netflix premiere first, and then I'll start speculating on that. But obviously, if Rock is part of WrestleMania next year, it'd be weird for him not to be in a main event. Tej, you agree? I mean, he can't be in a mid card or opening match, can he?
I mean, 100%. But we've also seen The Rock in a hosting role, which was a serviceable enough gig given the quality of the booking at the time. I think at the end of the day, anyone can fit into any role that the booking assigns them to, and if they're a strong enough performer, they will make that role feel as important as a main event. And if anyone can do that, it is Dwayne Johnson, because God bless him, the man can make any single throwaway feud feel like it matters to him more than anything in the world. The man was feuding with the Hurricane at the height of his main event stardom in WWF at the time, and he sold it, and he made it work. I have no doubt that he will rise to that he can rise to any role that's put in front of him. It's just, will he be able to optically make that role work?
A couple of comments in the chat. Darrell Freeman says The Rock needs to prove he can fit into a story without trying to spin it, and also add something to it and not take away. I mean, what you want is you want to get a sense that Rock shows up with product knowledge, that he understands the stakes are high, that this isn't, that he's just dropping in as a little bit of a carpetbagger. Hey, I'm here to get a big payday, and you should be grateful I'm here. Isn't it wonderful that I give you people my time and attention after all my success? No, you want him to show up and say, yeah, I've been following this. You don't want him to show up having not communicated with anyone ahead of time either. But he should be watching the product, getting a sense of the characters. He's a great performer. He should, he can show up with some ideas presented in a humble way. And also just say, and if my ideas don't work for you guys, I'll do whatever you want within reason. How do you think I'll fit in? I'd like to hear that's the case with him. That didn't sound like that was the case at all last time. And you could read Cody's face during the whole thing last year. You could look at him in his interviews for WrestleMania being asked about it, and it was just Cody the diplomat. I don't want to get in trouble, but I have too much pride to not I have too much pride to just cave in entirely and just go, hey, The Rock's here, whatever he wants goes. Obviously Cody was very immersed in the story. I say it every time Paul Levesque talks about Rock, you can see him, every word processes. It's like, how do I say something that that no one will say I was being rude or disrespectful to Rock, but I also can't hide the fact that when he shows up, it just messes everything up. There's a comment here from Junaid. Chris Evans, Red One co-star, recently spoke about the claims about Rock being a diva behind the scenes, and he didn't exactly defend him. He actually admitted what people say, but in a diplomatic way. And so, yeah, I mean, when I say this stuff, I'm not making it up. I mean, I've heard, diva, difficult, out of touch with what's going on, thinks he's a big shot. All that stuff is there, and he stepped in it last year and wanted a whole documentary made to try to reframe it in a positive way. But there's people like him. A Milano 20 says, I need the final boss. And it is a big part of the story. And ideally, he can be used to elevate people. And Lady B in the chat chimes in and says, I also think or hope Brian Gewirtz learned lessons last year, too. He's likely the brains behind a lot of this. Hopefully, Brian is following the product for him. And that is, when I say his people, I mean, Brian Gewirtz is the closest link he has. But, Gewirtz is, there's a team of very proud people right now writing in WWE. Tej. They are the writers behind the scenes. Paul Levesque leads that group. Paul Heyman, in a less formal way, is obviously involved in a lot of things. I don't think they look at the Brian Gewirtz era with Vince McMahon as like, oh, those are the great days. And boy, the great Brian Gewirtz, if he shows up, he can straighten us out and give us some sage advice. I think they think they're doing a better job than any writing or creative team has done in WWE history. I mean, I think they are that confident. Now, a lot of the revenue coming in is because of the state of TV and streaming and the industry and all that. And it would have happened to anybody who was even reasonably competent. However, that and so all the record revenue is there because of the state of the world, international streaming, all that stuff. But what isn't a result of that is fans paying record money to buy tickets to go sit at these shows. I always talk about the number one gauge of if your product is good. It's not how much money the TV network is paying you to air your show. It's not even how many people are watching your show, because we saw when Nitro sucked, more people were watching it than when Raw was great, because there's a certain inertia to viewership that there's a momentum. People watch out of habit, even if they don't like the product. But they stop spending money when the product starts disappointing them, and they pay money and attend when they like the product. AEW, nice TV deal, but obviously attendance is showing fans are not excited about the product right now relative to where they were a few years ago. WWE the opposite. So all that's to go around to say Brian Gewirtz can't show up going, I'm back. I got ideas. Everyone gather around. They're going to be like, who are you to talk like that? Tej, anything you want to add to that?
I think in addition to the momentum and the quality being up compared to where it's been during the Brian Gewirtz era, there's much stronger cohesion in the product across the board. Everything feels like it belongs in the same universe. The comparison that I always try and go back to is WrestleMania 38 when Stone Cold Steve Austin came back, and he got a main event, but it didn't feel out of place there because weirdly enough, the product felt much more disjointed than it does now. And Kevin Owens could just demand a main event in kayfabe by continually calling out a legend that hadn't wrestled for 19 years at the time. And it could just exist in its own little corner of Raw because, well, that's what every other feud was. No one cared about Seth Rollins getting his main event if you weren't a part of that specific feud. You know, Roman Reigns versus, I believe it was Lesnar that he faced that year. That was happening in its own little bubble, and no one else really cared about that. Nowadays, everything informs everything else. So Rock feels like he's just being dropped into this whirlpool of every other character belonging, and he sticks out like a sore thumb in a way that he might not have been in previous eras. I'd like to think that he's learned that lesson, but we all know an ego knows no bounds if it's not checked. Who knows?
Yeah, well put. Joe Schmo says Cody's reign has been boring. The only thing that's going to make it worth it is The Rock returning. So you can have Roman and in the blood, all the bloodline people kind of doing their thing, and just Rock and Cody, kind of loosely tied together, but also separate. Where, I don't know how you have the final boss and not have him involved with the bloodline. But if they do Rock Cody, then that's different. So I don't know. I mean, I think about it, but the more I think about it, the more I think, well, every time I think, I think I know what they're going to do for WrestleMania. And I think, oh, wait, there's that. Someone else will bring something up. I'm like, oh, that seems even more obvious. And then I just lose confidence to predict anything. They have a lot of cards they can play. And as Lady B says, time will tell. Lady B says, Rock also can't handle another PR nightmare. I have high hopes that he'll be better this time around. Well, I don't want to pick on. I try to defend him a little bit, because it's hard to be that famous and know who your friends are, and you're going to be whatever. You're going to lose touch. But if he was capable of learning a lesson about last time, I don't think last time would have happened in the first place. Like, I think that is sort of emblematic of something going on with him at this stage of life. That I don't think insisting on that documentary. Or suggesting it and people then picking up hints. Yeah, that's what Rock wants. Let's do it. I don't know. I didn't come away from that thinking this is a guy who learned his lesson. So anyway, I'll go. Brock Benningfield says it's crazy to think the bloodline was born under the Vince McMahon reign, but the new regime has curated to near perfection. Throw one more comment in here. Del J says it's not the Cody crybaby he's complaining about Cody. It's the type who booed Cena for years. All right, let's move on to another topic here. In fact, let's go to Chris Johnson, who sent in an email, and it'll steer us in another direction here. Chris Johnson from Tyler, Texas says Rhea injected some much needed heat into the women's War Games match, but it still doesn't need to exist, and I don't want to see it. Tej, what do you think about Rhea yelling at Liv Morgan, coming back with a protective clear face mask, announcer Barrett goes, she was supposed to be gone for months and she's back already, and headbutting Liv and yelling "War Games." I was actively hoping for elimination style Survivor Series match, an old school match. I like one War Games. I don't want to. I like one Hell in a Cell not to. I like one Royal Rumble not to, but I can live with that. That's a little bit different. Because and the reason part of the reason it's different is Hell in a Cell and War Games feel like a big grudge being paid off, and the Royal Rumble feels like an annual tradition with high stakes, but everybody's in it. It's not storyline based. It's format of a match base. So having a men's and a women's version sort of just feels fair and fine. And I think we've learned over the course of a 4-hour PLE, you open with one, you close with the other. They both can tell different stories and be good. War Games, 2 of them on one night. I don't like it. Tej, what do you think? Hey, I get to say you're muted. Yay. It's usually me who's muted.
I beat you to it. I completely agree, because I think fundamentally War Games and Elimination Style Survivor Series are made for feuds with different rhythms. When you have a War Games match, at least one side has to be a cohesive team, because the in-ring story that you tell with War Games is one team that's dysfunctional, one team that's functional, and the dysfunctional team having to come together. 2022, it was Jey Uso and Sami Zayn in the Bloodline having to learn to work together. In 2023, it was Jey Uso having to team up with the other faces on the Raw roster and prove himself against the unified Judgment Day. And, the men's War Games match has that dynamic done perfect. It's the original Bloodline having to cobble together, work through their issues against the more unified new Bloodline. The women's War Games match does not have a unified team on either side. It's a cobbled together set of faces that have intertwining rivalries with the cobbled together heels. And what infuriates me about that is that's exactly the dynamic of a traditional elimination style Survivor Series, because you get those longer moments of singles matches. Not everyone has to like everyone on either team. You saw that in the very, in my opinion, sloppy promo that opened Raw of Nia Jax having to openly retcon her hatred of Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez for the sake of making the team dynamics work. Bayley not being involved on the face team despite working with Naomi for however many months, Io Sky not bringing damage control with her. It all felt incredibly contrived just to fit one stipulation that was not necessary for this feud. I was not a fan of this at all this year for the women.
Yeah, made a really good case. Nia saying, I don't hate you, I don't like you, I just don't think about you. It was maybe it's overstating to say the best you can come up with given the circumstances, but it was a difficult situation. We're going to team. How do I make it sound like I have hatred for somebody and indifference towards the other, keep my heel arrogance, but also establish the foundation on how to coexist. But yeah, it's contrived in order to feature 5 on 5. So yeah. Talk about Liv Morgan and the job that she's doing in her role. And I thought tonight, just delivery wise, I bring it up because I thought it was good. Like we didn't have that kind of fake laugh that I just always sort of invalidates any momentum she gets in her promos, because it just, I don't know. I just don't like insincere, fake, gimmicky laughter at all on anyone, from anyone performing. Jeff Jarrett, Ted DiBiase, whatever. I mean, a lot of people do it. And it just, to me, laughter is a very genuine response. And when you fake it, it's obviously faked, and it just takes me out of it. This was better from Liv. I've been critical of her. She's gotten chance after chance with different character reinventions and different ways to frame her. But I mean, she's kind of in the best spot she's been in right now. And I think she's holding her own pretty well in a way that I don't think people would have predicted a year ago. Tej, how about you?
I think Liv Morgan sounded the most natural on the mic out of all of the 10 women involved in the opening promo. And the reason I say that is, especially growing up as a member of Gen Z, Liv Morgan nails the kind of young, incredibly insincere Gen Z influencer type better than anyone else. That kind of overly fawning, just, 100% girl, you got it. Even when Nia is saying, I don't like you, she's like, 100% understandable, I get it, 100%. And for anyone who's watching, I'm currently living in Los Angeles. I've met a lot of Liv Morgans, and she nails the cadence perfectly. And it's such an easy way to get heel heat because you know that she doesn't mean a single word she's saying.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely perfect. It's a perfect encapsulation of a very specific growing microcosm of society. And, it doesn't feel theatrical in a way that a lot of the less accomplished talkers in WWE kind of fall into, specifically Nia this week, as much as I've been a fan of her recently. I think Liv Morgan is firing on all cylinders. And like you, Wade, I've been converted. I'm a huge Liv Morgan fan at this point.
Al Archer says Liv is better in a cast than solo. The parts around her really add to her character. Yeah, having Raquel to play off of, being in a group setting, that works. But what do you think of Rhea coming back this soon? If she's able to and medically cleared to be in a War Games, I mean, she doesn't want to miss more time. Hopefully she's not so frustrated with time off that she's taking a risk she shouldn't be taking or whatever. But yeah, talk about her return after we had kind of braced ourselves for her to be gone for quite a while.
I mean, I'm a fan because Rhea Ripley is just leagues ahead of the women's division in terms of presence. And, she comes back and it's crazy how quick she absolutely owned the space. She has a fiery intensity beyond really anyone else in the women's division. And I think that she was the jolt of life that this feud needed. It does make me a bit skeptical of the Raw women's division because it felt so flat without her. I think it displays the ramifications of pushing Rhea as invincibly as they did in 2023 and most of 2024. It really does feel like no one else is truly at her level. And the only way that Liv Morgan even feels plausible is because she has Rhea's one Achilles heel. So in a bubble, I love that Rhea comes back, but it does highlight the sheer discrepancy between her and almost everybody else on WWE programming.
How do you want to see the Tiffany Nia Jax situation play out, and at what pace with Candice LeRae in the mix? Is obviously, I think obviously Tiffany's replacement as the sidekick.
I mean, I think I'm speaking for both of us when I say I don't want to see a huge amount of Money in the Bank fake teases moving forward because it's such a played out trope. And I feel like we've kind of rode that horse right up until fans are really going to lose investment because every single tease has had purpose because we're essentially seeing a woman in Tiffany Stratton get away from her toxic boss. We've seen her journey from internal remorse to anger to, acting out and not taking any of Nia's abuse any longer. And I think we're at the point in the narrative where a break needs to happen. I don't think a feud needs to happen immediately, but I think that a separation needs to be on the cards sooner rather than later, rather than, a typical Paul Levesque feud, which would go for more of a slow burn route. There are times when you need to be a little more explosive in your pacing. I think this story demands it. Otherwise, you risk neutering the babyface fire that Tiffany's slowly kind of building up. What do you think about that? Because I know long-term storytelling is really in vogue right now, but do you think that we're about to hit a tipping point between a long-term story and a drawn-out story with this one?
Yes, especially because of the baggage in WWE of the sidekicks taking the abused underling taking too long to break free. You have the baggage of Otis. We never really got the full satisfying payback for Chad Gable, despite a ton of time invested. The Miz Mizdow example we always go back to. So yeah, I mean, you want Tiffany to show some spine, and at some point you want to get a sense she's playing Nia Jax. That she's acting subservient, but she's finding ways to actually not be. Basically just trick Nia into thinking she's still got her under her thumb, but in reality, she's already in business for herself, waiting for the right time. And if fans pick up on that in real time, that's fine. If they look back or the announcers even explain it, or Tiffany says, "Oh, Nia, you thought I was, buying your BS. I wasn't." And, think about when this happened and that happened and that happened. And, almost just have an expository promo that exposes her secret plot to undercut Nia. I mean, So, but the short answer to your question is, yeah, we're kind of in a we're in a realm of that. Like, to me, Saturday Night's Main Event sort of feels like a moment that's fine. Netflix era really pushing it. Royal Rumble and beyond definitely dragged out. Like, then I just don't know if you can tell a story of Tiffany, being wise to Nia Jax and just waiting for her time and have it go on that long without it feeling like it is dragging on.
So let me ask you this.
Yep.
In that case,
Yeah.
let me ask you this: if we do get that separation, do you think we get a successful cash in on the road to WrestleMania from Tiffany Stratton, or do we get, I believe, the first ever women's failed cash in this year?
I think she succeeds. Yep, and I think it'll be against Nia. I mean, I don't think they're going to have it be the other women's title. That chance was there if they wanted to split them off, but it makes sense for it to be Nia. Yep. Let's see if we had a comment in the chat. Okay, so let's go to the next question from Chris. In his email, the Wyatt Six angle feels fresh because it's about something different than last time. It's not about someone mistreating family, but more of a straight-up feud, and the Wyatt family is on the back foot for a change. Much more serious promo with intensity from Bo. It's sort of like Christian and AEW. You can run out of people with dead fathers, and so you got to try to kill Taz or hospitalize him to create this. Eventually, you got to do something different. Obviously, they're doing that with, we talk about Nia Jax having two underlings. Now that's going on with that storyline with Christian, Nick Wayne, and Kip Sabian. So you don't want to get too hung up on one thing being the only thing you can feud over. So with the Wyatts, it worked, but you want there to be something about their mission and their purpose that's broader and not so specific that they're tied down. Do you agree with Chris Johnson's framing of this?
I mean, I do slightly disagree in that there is still that level of Miz has mistreated the ones he loved. In this case, it's R-Truth, and there will be retribution for that in the Wyatt Six. And that's, for me, the key to keeping the Wyatt Six as babyfaces in this feud, because their presentation is so sinister. Their promos are very cryptic, but allowing their motivations to essentially be as pure as they are is the secret sauce to what makes their feuds tick. And I do agree that it's not as specific as it once was, but the idea of, this group's MO stand against those who lie, those who take advantage, those who, are selfish. That to me is still a constant. I do like the fact that the Wyatt Six are on the back foot, though. That is a very, very different dynamic for them, and it makes them feel a little bit more, human in a way. I think I would have liked for them to have at least one more feud where they run roughshod over anyone, just to, build them up as a credible threat, given just how the American-made feud just kind of petered out, and it didn't really have a moment with the Wyatt Six standing as tall as I think they should have to really legitimize them. But overall, I do like the different dynamic that they have against the Final Testament, because it does wonders to put the Final Testament over.
Yeah, no, really good points. And I think you can have it. Betraying the ones you love is part of a moral stand that the Wyatts have that can be kind of through reduction become something that applies to other circumstances, but at the heart of it is the same. So you can have a variation of, hey, we are coming after you because you betrayed this friend, or you didn't live up to a certain moral code that we believe in, and they apply that moral code to family, turning on people who are literally family or like family, but it can apply to other moral failures. And it is a core driving force of that group that I don't think they should stray too far from, but I think they can, like you said, pull back a little bit on the specifics and still do it. Okay, let's see. Oh, Chad Gable, real quick with the Creeds. What do you make of where Chad Gable is now compared to where it seemed like he was heading? Losing tonight, throwing a bit of a tantrum, but then it kind of parlayed into giving the Creeds some weird motivation to slap each other and get worked up. I don't know what to think, although I as good as Chad Gable was in the ring, I think they were trying to turn him into a new Kurt Angle, and he's not main event to me. I want Gable on my roster for lots of reasons, but I think he started, I'm searching for the cliche of being positioned higher than his charisma and his presence called for. Tej, what do you think?
Chad Gable's booking post WrestleMania, it just makes me sad because I've been a Chad Gable mark for so long. Ever since NXT, the Ready, Willing, and Gable era, I thought that he had the makings of a genuine, like, mid-card underdog babyface, and the build to, his feud with Gunther in the build up to WrestleMania, I thought it was incredibly organic. He had a groundswell of support that felt like, breaking kayfabe a little bit. This was a guy who never really felt like he got his due, and he never really got the ball that he could take and run with it. He had that chance, and it just kind of fizzled away. The heel turn itself was incredible, if a bit rushed, and this is atypical of the Triple H era. It felt like the follow-up wasn't really there. The payoffs almost cartoonishly just never happened. As you said earlier, we had Otis kind of turning against Gable, but the big blow-off match never really happened. And now it feels like he's just being thrust into this very cheap, one-dimensional version of Team Angle. He's running the same storyline that he did with Alpha Academy over and over, except this time with less defined sidekicks in the Creeds. And it doesn't feel like this is building to anything that fans will be conditioned to have interest in. It just feels like wheel spinning for the sake of wheel spinning, and it's openly directionless. I'm not a big fan. I've gone completely cold on Chad Gable, which is something I didn't even do during the Shorty G days.
Wow. Well, then he was underpushed, and you felt bad for him. And now he's sort of maybe overpushed and didn't quite live up to the push he was getting. And then you add to it weird booking. Keith adds, Chad is a great wrestler, however, his character lacks charisma. He comes off like a petulant child. I think you can have a petulant child succeed as a character, but it doesn't feel like it's part of Chad Gable in a main event level, as a main event player.
There needs to be a level of pushback to make that petulant child character work. Whether it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if his, like with Maxine in Alpha Academy, if his, adversaries look vulnerable and make him seem like a villain, or if they push back like Otis did and put him in his place and he feels like quivering, like he's all bark, no bite.
Mm-hmm.
But the Creeds and Ivy Nile have just been given so little in the way of characters. They just come across as these meatheads that are unaffected by everything Chad Gable's doing to them beyond just, more motivation, will be stronger next time.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, it's dampening the Chad Gable character because that's a character that thrives on the reactions of those around him.
He can have good matches. He's gonna earn his keep through that. But yeah, this isn't. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's great for the Creeds either. And you're with me on Otis and Maxine and Tozawa. Just sort of whatever momentum they had, it just sort of got extinguished with a half-hearted payoff to the tension between him and Chad.
Absolutely. And right now they just exist as this paragon of good guys, but they've been relegated to the undercard. And they've got babyface fire for days. They're a quick cheat code if you need a heel to get a quick little bit of heat during a match in the first hour of Raw, but they've got nothing substantial to do. And I think that following the failed Money in the Bank run with Otis, I don't think management really sees any of them as anything more than just comedy good guys in the undercard.
Brock Benningfield in chat said Gable's definitely not elevating the Creeds or Ivy at this point. Yeah, I think people thought higher of the Creeds before they showed up on the main roster than they do now. Okay, up next from Chris, another point he brings up, Gunther and Priest feels fresh again. I liked the angle tonight. Your thoughts, Tej?
I think that, for the very first time, Gunther allowing himself to have a crisis of confidence, it's an angle that automatically has extreme ramifications because we've seen him run through the entire roster for years at this point, both on NXT and on the main roster. And it automatically, keeps Damian feeling fresh because he's the one guy that's been able to rattle the ring general. And I've I thought it's an incredible inversion of their first feud where Gunther was arguably he had let his guard down the most. He was openly insulting his opponents he was openly insulting Priest with the street trash comment in a way that he hadn't really done in a lot of his previous feuds, because that's what made Gunther unique is he gave his opponents their props even though he was a heel. So to see him kind of get hoisted by his own petard after, like letting himself underestimate this guy, and that finally being the one thing that gets to him, it's a really nuanced bit of heel work. And watching the unraveling or the beginnings of the unraveling has been very, very, engaging to watch. I'm all the way back in, and I was a hater when they announced that they were running back Priest versus Gunther at Survivor Series. I thought there were so many more fresh matchups they could have done for both men, but I'm all the way back into this feud now, and I don't know if it ends with Priest reclaiming the championship. I think Gunther's reign has a lot of life left in it.
Yeah.
But it definitely puts an asterisk on the Survivor Series match that I don't think was there before, and that's what's keeping me interested.
Yeah. I mean, if you can convince people Priest is sustaining himself at a high enough level after losing the title that you can imagine in sort of a meta sense him being champion again, that's a success because now you've extended interest in the match. Going into Saturday's main event, into the MSG show on December 26th, then, who knows beyond that. Okay. This will lead a bit into, it ties in because of Ludwig Kaiser. Chris Johnson says, the crowd was hot for Braun Breaker versus Sheamus. It sucks there couldn't be a clean finish. Well, there could have been. There just wasn't. There's nothing stopping Paul Levesque from booking more clean finishes. I don't know. Does Sheamus need protecting? I mean, I guess it depends on how many rematches they're going to do or whatever, but I don't know. I mean, they're asking fans often. They're getting fans invested in matches and not giving them a finish. And if I'm reading a novel from my favorite or a recommended author, and I get to the last chapter and then it's just a hook for the next book and there's no payoff to the 260 pages I just read, like, buy the next book. It's like, well, yeah, you can say it. We don't want to kill off the character. We don't want to pay off the big plot line here. We don't want a resolution because we want to carry it over into another book. And it's like, you do that too much and I'm going to stop reading your book and start reading something else. I'm going to lose enthusiasm for it. WWE is doing tremendous business right now. They haven't paid a price yet. But man, when business is good, you can't get sloppy. You can't take it for granted. And you can't start making mistakes that are building resentment that hasn't manifested in frustration and a lack of interest. And I do fear, even though every individual situation you can kind of justify and go, well, but we don't want Brock Breaker to lose, but we don't define Sheamus down, and it's a conundrum no matter what they do. But they're doing this kind of trapdoor finish while Ludwig Kaiser, blah blah blah, too often now. Your thoughts?
I completely agree, and like as you said, I can find ways to justify this one. It's like, oh, you want to keep Sheamus as a viable contender for the IC title because that's an easy way to juice a quick TV match because everyone wants Shamo to become a Grand Slam champion, complete the cycle, so everyone's going to be invested in a Shamo IC title match. But if every single match leaves without a conclusive winner, then you've got your audience conditioned to believe that one loss automatically devalues a wrestler's standing. And that's when you get a lot of the bad faith critics saying like, oh, he lost to the world champ, buried, automatically stocks down. And right now, when business is hot, you can get away from that. But I'm definitely with you in that when interest eventually does wane in the product, as it will, that's how, everything moves in cycles. You'll see certain wrestlers drop off the upper card into the mid card or even further because they rack up one or two losses and a fan base on the fence suddenly decides that they're not worth watching and investing as a main event act anymore.
And bookers who make mistakes and then see business go down always lean on wrestling is cyclical, but they're getting it backwards. Wrestling is cyclical because when times are good, bookers make mistakes that leads to a downturn in business. So it's like, what causes cyclicalness? It's decisions, it's mistakes. It's not inevitable in and of itself. It's not inherently inevitable. And so with WWE, I mean, Paul Levesque's a student of history, more than, well, and Paul Heyman is too. Like, but most people in that company, especially in the higher ups, are not in the same way. Hopefully he understands when times are good, it is not a time to get sloppy or arrogant or whatever. WCW, ran into that. You're going to have challenges. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be, like AEW with Cody and AEW, there were some missteps and fans started booing them. There's going to be things you just don't foresee and mistakes you make. You want to build up that goodwill. And then when business goes down, if you messed with that goodwill, it wasn't inevitable business was going to go down when it went down. The reason business goes down is historically mistakes are made when business is good. So the length of time WWE has a level of success, something like this has yet to be written. It is not, there's not an end date to this because, well, that's just the way it works. They should be scratching and clawing to make every right decision, to build goodwill and sustain confidence in their viewership. And I was into that match, and then it was a very unsatisfying finish. And I just don't think you want people kind of hedging, getting invested in an outcome. If they start forecasting, well, I can kind of see that they don't want Sheamus to lose yet. I can kind of see that Braun Breaker is someone they're protecting, so we're not going to get a finish here. When people start thinking that, they stop paying to see matches. They stop showing up to TV. They aren't going to show up on the PLEs to watch if they think they're not going to get payoffs. And you also don't want the formula to be, well, you get payoffs on PLEs but not TV. That just telegraphs things too. So, what do you think of the match itself, Tej? How did Breaker and Sheamus come across, each of them, given the context and framing of this match? And they're different places in their careers, obviously.
I think that it's a great parallel of a young powerhouse versus an old school brawler that has, most of his career behind him. In a way, they are wrestling the same style, but there was a conscious effort to differentiate their ring awareness. You got Breaker, his MO in the ring was essentially just charging forward. You got to see Shamo do some more counters and reversals in a way that suggests, like, okay, I may not be as strong as this young buck, but I know where he's coming from. I've got him spotted. I can, outthink him. And that's why this was one of my, up until the ending, it was one of my favorite matches on the card, because there was a level of character interactions that you don't often see in WWE matches in ring. And it wasn't like easily telegraphed to the audience. I think that Braun Breaker's reign has been, marked by one thing. If he can't run through his opponents immediately, he comes into problems. That was where a lot of his issues with Sami Zayn wound up, is because Sami Zayn could just outthink him in the ring. And, seeing Shamo in a different light is always great, because the man has made it through so many eras of WWE, and for the fact that he's still operating at the level he is just so gratifying to see. The ending with Kaiser interfering, it is what it is. And if it leads to, Kaiser being seen as a main event act or a viable title contender, I can get behind it as a means to an end. I loved his promo with Gunther. Obviously, I don't speak German. If anyone in the chat does, let me know. But I definitely saw that I heard the words Axel Dieter being mentioned. So mentioning, like, you're the son of a famous German wrestler, go stand on your own 2 feet. I hope that, this is finally the push that Kaiser needs to be seen as his own man.
Yeah, the dynamic with Kaiser and Gunther could be really dumbed down into, Gable Otis actually was better than a go-to example of a bad dynamic. There was nuance there. I think there's actually more nuance than some people give credit for with Tiffany and Nia Jax, but the abused, subservient guy with no spine who just looks up to someone and gets abused. I think there can be more to Kaiser than that. And I think we saw that tonight, the camera picking up on him, just kind of staring off into space thinking, and then Gunther shows up, and then he stands up to Gunther, goes, what was that about? Why did you back off when last week? And his we're watching him process not heartbreak, but sort of like confusion. I look up to this guy, and he was he felt infallible, and yet last week I saw some vulnerability and something different. Someone in the chat called it a bit of a maybe a crisis of confidence in Gunther. That's a different side to his character at this point. Tej, talk about, maybe do a better job than I am, as I'm struggling to try to come up with a way to kind of explain the dynamic with what Kaiser is going through. But we're seeing him struggle with processing a change in how he feels about his mentor.
Mm-hmm. I definitely saw a lot of disillusionment ever since, Gunther began showing more human traits. I saw a comment online as I was watching of, this feels like the first time I saw my dad cry as an adult, and I saw him as a human rather than, my hero that always had the answer. And what differentiates Gunther and Kaiser from every other, dynamic that's similar is it feels like there's genuine care between them. Gunther's kind of like plea to Kaiser this episode, it felt like, I would be happy if you were in the main event. I would be happy to see you doing well. The delivery's off, the execution of, chopping the hell out of the guy's chest when he does something wrong, that's terrible. But you get the sense that Gunther would at least be happy if Kaiser succeeds. And that, to me, is what's keeping me on Kaiser's side, because by pushing Gunther away, even if he walks away a better man, then, everyone is satisfied with what they had eventually.
If you're gonna be asked to cheer for Kaiser eventually, you want to see him now showing. You want to understand why he's staying in an abusive dynamic. That there's genuine hope, a genuine sense of camaraderie and appreciation, mutually shared. They're both in different places, but you don't want to look at him as just a fool or a sap or a pushover, and then but now it's time to cheer him. So that's what you're, I think, talking about. I think that's really smart. I think it feels deliberate that they want you to look at Kaiser as someone who, yes, he wants to stay loyal to Gunther. It's being tested, but there's enough there that you don't just feel like, well, what's his problem? Why can't he see what we see?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Darrell Freeman says, I don't like what they're doing with Gunther. I feel like the person who gets to the top of their sport, I feel like a person who gets to the top of their sport starts having confidence issues. I feel like this is a way to prop up Priest by lowering Gunther. I think there's more to it than that, but I'm a little surprised, and I don't know. I'm pausing because I don't know if this is kind of central to the storyline with Priest and Gunther, what's going on, or and Kaiser, but it's going to go away, and Gunther's going to get his confidence back in time, or if this is something that's kind of going to stick with him as a character trait. But it can get boring if somebody is just a formulaic same guy. I mean, this isn't 1985 or 1975 where you can kind of have a run as a heel, go to different territory with a fresh audience, do the same bit. You want to have some layering and nuance to who you are that keeps you interesting. And I enjoyed Gunther with his sincere compliments followed by a dig that unraveled the compliments. As a shtick, as a formula, it was delightful, but it's not something you want to just keep doing over and over where it just becomes kind of predictable and almost derivative. So this does feel like they're willing to play with his character a bit, so that he isn't just, always dominant and always mentally and physically a step ahead of everybody.
I'm completely with you there. And the reason I think that, especially going into Saturday night's main event and moving forward, they will continue emphasizing this part of his character. I don't know if you caught this, but there was a little Easter egg in Gunther and Kaiser's promo where Gunther said, "Look in my eyes, what do you see?" And I mean, we all know who says that, which makes me think that we're getting Gunther versus Punk at Saturday night's main event, which, that would be a perfect kind of old school dynamic match to have on the revitalization of a program from the territory era. And not to mention, Punk's greatest skill on the mic is getting under his opponent's skin. If there's anyone that could continue realizing, I cannot outwork this guy, I cannot match him in the ring, but I can take him off his game better than anybody else, I think that could be a great kind of angle for them to have a little mini rivalry moving into the NBC special.
Well, I'll go back to the chat for a second. Chris Johnson, whose email we're reading, is chiming in, which is kind of fun, real-time response. And he says, Tej is an incredible analyst. Super interesting to hear his takes. One of the best. Real-time feedback, answering Chris's email. Tej, look at you. You're
Chris, you're my guy.
Yep.
I appreciate you.
And standard deviation ads. I agree. Tej is an excellent analyst. Look at this.
You guys got to stop this. This is raising my ego to dangerous levels.
Okay, I'll stop then. There's like 7 more people saying nice things. I'm deleting them before you can read them. We got to keep you in check. All right. Lady B says, I like that Gunther isn't a robot with feelings and a weakness or two. It allows people to be more invested. You don't want him to turn babyface, and part of it could be a calculation. If he's too dominant and too witty, people start cheering him. So show some vulnerability, show some not in a way that's endearing, but in a way that takes away this sort of like, oh, he's so badass, we're going to cheer him. There's a Road Warrior issue back in the 80s when they first arrived. They're just like so dominant, people cheered him even as they're beating up beloved baby faces because they didn't sell, they didn't show any weakness. And so maybe it is a it's not just interesting storytelling, it's actually protecting Gunther as a heel in the kind of semi long run.
Yeah, I mean, it also adds a level of realism because we see it in other sports. You see these guys that run through their entire division, make it to the top of the mountain, and then when that kind of veneer of perfection is broken, they start having like, do I still have it? There's that persona feels like shattered. For any UFC fans out there, Conor McGregor, after his loss to Khabib, you can tell if you read between the lines. He keeps mentioning Khabib. Khabib is his white whale that never got away, and he never really felt like the myth, the legend that he was when he was cleaning out the featherweight division beforehand. So I think it does play into just making Gunther feel like a more fully realized human.
Yeah. Michael Gross says, I feel there's a way longer road for Kaiser than most stars. The look, the promos, and steady improved skill set. Tej, quick thoughts. Kaiser, we're talking a lot about Gunther right now and the prospects for him. Is Kaiser someone, you mentioned a little bit, but do you see him as a potential top guy or more of a maybe a Sheamus level long-term guy where he's just, kind of just a notch below the top group or something else?
I think he can be a main event act. I think that he could headline a pay-per-view because he has such an incredible, like, chiseled look to him. So many people have said he feels like a James Bond villain. He has attitude, presentation, and of course the man can go in the ring. We've seen him have that star quality of making a legacy and a moment out of nothing. And in this case, it's ladies and gentlemen. That's a very kind of simple line that he's turned iconic. And that's something that really makes him transcend the crowd to me. So I would not be surprised if eventually he gets a turn holding one of the top prizes.
Very good. Back to Chris Johnson. He said, I'm afraid the War Raiders will never be over. Not like I've thought the New Day will never be over, and then as in the gimmick will never end, meaning they won't get over, they won't be popular, they won't gain traction as an act. Liv Morgan was a project that just never ended. They're just like, we're gonna keep trying until it works. Are they in a better place now, or is this just investing more TV time in an act that has already been defined as pretty one-dimensional, even though they're trying to make them into this inspirational story coming back from their injuries and augmenting their style a little bit to accommodate their situation?
See, I actually had a question for you about the Raiders because, well, less so now that they're back to being the War Raiders and they're not actual Vikings in kayfabe, but does a team with a shtick and presentation as old school as the Raiders, can they maintain that character and still survive in a promotion that now prides more realistic characters? Because if you told me the Raiders belonged right next to the Head Shrinkers back in that era, I would say, well, yeah, that makes sense. But they've always felt like a little bit of an outlier in 2024 WWE. And, when you have imagery that's as violent as war, it's a bit of a hard sell to turn them babyface in any capacity, which will naturally limit them. So I'm curious what you think their ceiling is.
No, I was having the same thought just watching the ring entrance tonight. I was like, they feel so out of step with just about every other act out there. Who do they think they are? What are we supposed to think they are? How are they grounded any kind of reality. The Usos were just a one-dimensional group tag team for a long time in a division a tag division where it just wasn't that important, didn't get a lot of time for nuance. And that was a problem with the Dudleys and Edge and Christian. They didn't, the Dudleys could really cut promos, but they didn't even get a ton of promo time. Edge and Christian turned out to both be really good promos. It took them forever to get TV time. The Hardys, same thing. I mean, it's just the tag division was a place it just was kind of lower mid-card stuff. And the War Raiders, you can drop them into, late 80s, early 90s WWE tag team era, and they would be okay. But yeah, it doesn't. You can see them kind of struggling with it. They don't just want to turn them into like Eric and Ivar, but change their names or get rid of the gimmick. What's left? I don't know how you transition them out of this. So it's a struggle, but they keep trying. They believe in them. Glenn B says in the chat, it helps with the War Raiders that they're really, really good. They're athletic, big dudes. They always stand out. I don't have an answer to it, but yeah, I mean, what does War Raiders mean? And, they're in the woods with a bonfire and throwing axes. I mean, I still don't they don't fit into the reality of, kind of the more reality-based personas of everybody else. It's an ongoing issue. I don't have an answer for it, and I don't think it's like, well, that's their niche. That's what makes them stand out. I just think it doesn't make them like super relatable. But if they keep having good tag team matches, maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe there's just room for them to just do what they're doing and, be good for a match. Maybe they don't, not every act needs to have all the nuance of the Jimmy, Sammy dynamic. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it's okay just to have good matches and be kind of a one-dimensional throwback old school tag team, and no harm,
Yeah, absolutely. And like, as Glenn said, I want to add to that just a little bit. The Raiders always stand out because they have such a unique dynamic, not just that they're athletic, but which of them does which moves. Like, Eric is the smaller one, but he's the powerhouse, right? He's the one like throwing people around. Ivar's huge, but he's going up, he's doing top rope moonsaults. It makes them feel unique in a really subtle way. The other thing I wanted to mention is, you mentioned the Dudleys, and the reason the Dudleys are one of my favorite, tag teams and stables in ECW in all of wrestling is that they have lore, but the lore makes sense. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Dudleys are all siblings, despite all looking different, because they were all the son of a traveling salesman, Big Daddy Dudley, in like the 60s and the 70s, right? Yep. So that's how you had Bubba Ray, Devon, Sign Guy, Dances with Dudley, who was part Native American, which that's aged well. It was lore that was consistent with the world of the time. And there are people like the War Raiders that exist in society. We've seen war fanatics, the guys that actually own lances and maces. And if you find a way to rationalize the War Raiders in 2024, you can make them work. I don't know if WWE has enough energy invested in the Raiders to do that. And you also run the risk of, those people that I've mentioned tend to be on the uglier parts of society, for lack of a better term, because, they have very violent thoughts. I'm unsure if they're willing to go there. I do think there is a solution, but it'll revolve around a lot of towing lines and finding the right balances. And I don't know if the Raiders are at a point in the card that justifies that experimentation.
Yeah, well put. That you rounded right back to where I was when you started. Maybe it's not a problem that needs a lot of attention. It's not great, but maybe that's not where you want to put your time, is try to get more out of them. They're okay being one-dimensional, and they just, it might be more effort than it's worth, but maybe they got an idea and maybe they can make it work. We'll see. Bubba turned into Bully Ray, who headlined TNA and was part of major storylines. I mean, it's just like sometimes something, and heck, who saw Christian Cage in this AEW character sprouting from Edge and Christian? I mean, so maybe there's still something there to be harvested. I don't know. It's a comment here. Oh, just Michael Gross said, I would have the War Raiders paint up only for major pay-per-views. I guess kind of a little like Finn Balor and the Demon, kind of pick your spots, but not have the look all the time. Brock Benningfield says, Nia, Liv, and Cross are examples of give it enough time and you can find something that works. All right, so next from Chris Johnson, the finish was obvious, but really fun match with Bronson Reed and Seth Rollins. It felt like a better show this week, and if I hadn't been told it was taped, I wouldn't have known. Thanks for the great work you do at the Torch. Thanks, Chris. So the Bronson Reed Seth Rollins match, it was the main event. Your thoughts on the execution of it and the finish with, I mean, when Wade Barrett's like, look, Seth's so smart. He knew that one stomp wasn't enough. He's got to do more. And I'm like, no, this is going to backfire. And so Solo, I mean, it made enough sense. I really shouldn't pick on it. I thought it was framing what was about to happen well, which is what you do. Okay, this is my point. You don't want Wade Barrett going, what is Seth doing? He could have won the match, and have Seth like go to the top rope. Although I guess you could frame it to counter my counterpoint as Seth doesn't just want to win. He wants to punish this guy for what he's done. I mean, they could have framed it that way too. Bottom line is he gets to the top rope. Solo stands on the announce table. Seth looks away briefly. It's enough time for Bronson to recover and then, hit the tsunami, and get his finisher over. So what do you think of the match, given the build up to it and the brawl at ringside with the two sides of the War Games that fought to the back, but then Solo showing up and being a key factor in the finish?
I mean, the pacing was the one thing with the interference that I thought really differentiated this match, because we all know the structure of a chaotic brawl at the end. It starts off as a one-on-one match, and then eventually both sides keep adding members, and we end with this big chaotic brawl to close the show. So having the new bloodline immediately come out, the original bloodline intercept, and then we get the one-on-one, it felt like an inversion of what we've seen a million times before, and that made my investment immediately increase. I'm like, oh, okay, that part's out of the way. Maybe we get like a clean finish here. Of course we didn't, because Solo jumps in, but it definitely makes me think that the regime is aware of the booking patterns they've used, and they're aware of audiences kind of tuning out until the eventual interference does happen, and this is their way of kind of mitigating that. The match itself, I mean, Rollins and Reed have absolutely incredible chemistry. It's an old school David versus Goliath. I loved all the moments of Seth realizing, I need to pick at this guy little by little, a kick to the head, then to the knee, then you get him down, then back to the head. There's a level of, they call him the architect for a reason, and it's so great to see that version of Seth coming back to the forefront. All in all, no notes, bit of a generic finish, but, hey, it's par for the course. We're in the middle of building a feud with the bloodline. This is just how it's going to go. I found it a really nice, serviceable way to end the episode. What about you?
Yeah, so again, this is the case where, you have storyline justification for all these things. And WWE is going to say, and Vince McMahon always said, we're in the storytelling business. We're not in a sports business, but you can go too far down that road in rationalizing, not ultimately having that framework of being a sport where there's some sort of accountability that makes, in the end, the match has to be the end point. Like somebody earlier said, what would be the point of a women's elimination Survivor Series match if they weren't War Games? Like, what would be the point? I'm like, winning the match. Like that has to be enough. That has to be enough. You can never define it. Like, you're making it really difficult for yourself as a booker and as a wrestling company if winning a match is just a shoulder shrug. Like, well, what does that mean? That's what matters. Like, in sports, it's like players want to win. They want to win because, yes, you stack up wins and then you make the playoffs and then, whatever. But it's about winning, and the culture of sports is people don't like a player who's trying to score points just to rack up points for his next contract or a fame and acclaim, and he's not a good teammate, or if he's not playing defense and running back on defense. Like, there is a culture in sports of you should be trying to win. You shouldn't be in it for yourself, and pro wrestling should protect that. That's part of the simulated sports environment, is the pride of winning counts. Like, that's granted, there's long baseball, NFL, long seasons in NBA and NHL, and not every player plays hard every game. Not everybody runs back on defense, or whatever. I mean, that can be a story you tell. But WWE needs to protect match finishes. So Solo standing on a table and Seth being distracted didn't make him seem... It was a middle ground. Seth could have glanced at him, but stayed focused. Like, Solo wasn't an imminent threat. That's the issue with especially baby faces, but any wrestler getting distracted by something is if it's not an imminent threat, you should still be completely focused on immediately getting back to what you're doing. Like, if I'm driving and I drop my phone, like, I might glance down like, oh, I dropped my phone. But life and death for me and everybody else is me looking back straight ahead and paying attention to the road. That a wrestler should have that same instinct. I'm about to get beat up or lose if I don't stay focused on the match. And so I don't like the finish. Now, briefly noticing Solo and immediately turning back to the ring, and that being just enough time for Reed to recover, because Wade Barrett said one stomp's not enough. This keeps it from being egregious for me. Like, I didn't watch this and just go, oh God, this is just such an example of the worst of WWE booking. It wasn't. It's a better version of a distraction finish. Of course he's going to notice Solo. And then he went back to focus, but it was too late. So again, it's my long way of saying I didn't have a huge problem with the finish. It's building up War Games, but it's part of that ongoing pattern where you just have too high a percentage of matches where the viewers are learning, don't pop for near falls because X, Y, or Z hasn't happened yet, and there won't be a finish until something happens. You know, a Nia Jax match won't end until Tiffany comes out. You know, whatever. You don't want people disinvesting in near falls because they figured out the formula. And so they've got to be careful about that. And that's why I say you can justify each one individually, but eventually collectively it starts chipping away at the foundation of what keeps people invested in your matches. So anyway, Brock Bennyfield says, another great analogy. Spot on. Thanks, Brock. Tej, anything you want to add to that?
You know what? On that one, I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, we saw something similar with AEW in the early months of 2024, where they started relying a little too much on time limit draws as a way to elongate feuds and avoid clean finishes. And you got the same criticisms there, but because they're not on a hot streak right now, you really got a lot of people saying everything feels formulaic. You're seeing the same thing over and over again, and it's a great example of what you're talking about. You know, I'm an AEW fan, and I'm a diehard AEW fan. I always have been. And, you know, I could rationalize each one in a vacuum, but when you look back at the product as a whole during those couple of months, it definitely felt stodgy. You know, it was the same thing kind of over and over again. And it's missing the forest for the trees. And I'm paranoid that WWE is only avoiding those criticisms because they are as hot as they are right now. And if and when that drops off, there's going to be a lot of little slip-ups that will no longer go, you know, unnoticed by the fans.
Sometimes tires blow out because you roll over a shard of metal, but other times they pop because you haven't been inflating it properly and you haven't been paying attention to the tread. And eventually it just wears away and pops. And so, like with booking, you can sometimes make a huge mistake or a huge misfortune happens, but other times business falls apart because of things that you have not been tending to or things you've been actively doing for months or a couple years. And it just finally, there's this sort of critical mass moment where the audience over the small period of time just goes, I've had enough. By the way, we got to get you on a AW Dynamite post show so we can talk AW with you too. So nudge me about that, because I get, you know, kind of a rotations and some people are more into one company than the other, but it'd be great to get you on a Dynamite post show and get your analysis of the show one of these days. So
don't have to tell me twice.
Yes. So Tej Narayanan fans, Dynamite coming up, his analysis on AW. All right. Email from JB from Detroit. I'm really not a fan of having this women's War Games match. It's very arbitrary, thrown together and almost patronizing, as if they were forced to shoehorn a women's War Games without bothering to set the foundation for a real blood feud. It's lazy booking, and it takes away from the men's War Games and future War Games by the law of diminishing returns. It's really no different than the complaints I heard that were rightfully very critical of how AEW set up their blood and guts match this year. Agree. I mean, we covered that earlier, but yeah, JB making framing the argument effectively there too. He also says, was today a reset for American Made? Is there a place for them to sink their teeth into anything of substance? Love the show, and everybody go VIP. Thanks, JB. Good week for him to not send a long email, since Chris covered a lot of topics well and got us discussing those. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we talked about the Creeds earlier too. Hopefully they can rehabilitate whatever's gone wrong with the Creeds, which it does seem like something has. It almost feels like they've had a reason to lose some confidence in them based on the way that they've pushed them.
I mean, it's a typical example of relying too much on an act's look rather than, their capabilities in the ring, because the Creeds have a very all-American Olympic wrestler look, but they've used that to parlay into just, creating them as Chad Gable's new heaters for this weirdly jingoistic new stable. And I'm unsure, are they trying to lean into that as much as they could be for heel heat? Is it just a part of them? And it just, American made, it just feels half-baked, and I don't think they're really going to get any momentum until they're in a feud where they can win decisively and really say, we are the best, we will dominate our opposition, and we are destined for the main event, because it's inherent to a stable whose entire shtick is we are American made because we are the most talented in ring.
All right, Junaid brings up something we haven't yet. Great vignettes for Dakota Kai and Lyra Valkyria, inspirational and setting them up for great things. Perhaps a challengers for Liv. Two separate vignettes. Felt like they would not have made the cut if it were a live show. But it's one of the benefits of a pre-tape show is you get a little bit more. They put a little more effort into the Wyatt 6 vignette, the Karrion Kross Miz vignette. But yeah, Dakota Kai and Valkyria. Any thoughts? Any takeaways from those, Tej?
I mean, at the expense of not sounding like a party pooper, I've learned to not put a lot of stock into vignettes for wrestlers that aren't doing a lot at the moment. After recent example is Giovanni Vinci, which if you guys ever read my SmackDown Feud Tracker column, you will see my absolute fury at Giovanni Vinci not making it to TV consistently after all the work they did to rehabilitate him. And
there's got to be a story there. Like I haven't asked around. I might dig around a little bit. Maybe he did something where it caused him to just. Because people thought, they're building him up in vignettes, kind of like the Goon. He's just going to be a jobber to the stars back in 30 years ago. But it seems like I don't want to irresponsibly speculate. So I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that I think he did anything that he should be ashamed of or wrong, but it comes across as all that time they put into him, and then he loses on TV, and then he's gone. It's almost like he had to have done something wrong, or maybe he got injured, or maybe something in his personal life came up and he had asked for time off. It could be so many things, but it doesn't feel intentional. Like I wouldn't, to me, this isn't like, why'd they build him up and bury him? It feels like there had to be something intervening that caused the derailment of whatever their intentions were.
Absolutely. But, just in other examples, there was a Ludwig Kaiser vignette that aired in 2023 and nothing substantial really came from him in terms of a solo push at that time. I remember when he was still injured, a Johnny Gargano vignette aired about, I did this my way. There was no place for me in NXT, so I made my own path. Mm-hmm. And it was another couple of months he came back, and even then, I was just in a meaningless feud with Imperium for a couple of months. So as much as I want to believe that Dakota Kai and Lyra Valkyria are due for a singles push because they both deserve it, they're both very talented, I've just been conditioned to not believe a vignette means much right now. I don't know, Wade. What do you think?
Well, maybe it was just filler. Maybe it's a pre-tape show. Who have we not given attention to? Who don't we trust to put in the ring and hold the viewership? So let's just do, pad the show a little bit with a couple of vignettes. And and maybe it isn't a sign of more. That said, Dakota Kai, I actually have to. Valkyria going, hey, I was thrown into the fire. I didn't get burned. It's like she didn't win, but she's like framing it as I held my own against people with great experience. I showed I belong. It's a fine, innocuous reminder of what we saw with our own eyes, but framing it in a way that sets her up to be relevant should they choose to, give her some more TV time. And Dakota Kai, she's part of a big act, and it gave her some time to in a slickly produced way create a little backstory for her to remind viewers of who she is, what she sounds like, what her personality is. So maybe it's more maintenance than a sign of something to come, but maintenance vignettes are fine. I think they should be part of the mix. Okay. Tej, anything else you want to bring up? Otherwise, I'll close out with just a few other chat room comments to kind of round things out that I marked for comment.
I mean, for me, nothing specifically other than I didn't think my investment in Survivor Series would be as high as it is, given the length of the build up to the men's War Games match. But, especially with Bronson Reed in the mix, no matter who the fifth man is for the original Bloodline, I definitely find myself feeling like the act has been freshened up more than I thought I would.
Cool. All right. Michael Gross said in the chat, I love this Bronson push. He's too talented to be working mid-card. A new Bam Bam Bigelow or Vader. Great all-body style athletic heavyweight. Obviously, that's how WWE feels. And, I mean, people wanted him to get a push. And, we talk about Liv and Kaiser. There's people who sort of like, it's start, stop until they find something that works. And there's been a little bit of that with him. You could see they're like, what's his... We saw a lot, on air start, he disappears. Here's a reintroduction. Oh, there's a backstage promo. There's something there, but it's not what we need right now. Now we've got him and he's part of the Bloodline. Where do you think is this a one-off for War Games? Does he hang out with the new Bloodline? I was thinking, tonight it makes sense if there's nothing else to it to do this, to round it out to 5. If you are okay with 5, if they really wanted to do that, and maybe it's just a bridge to get them 5-on-5. But Bronson Reed is a babyface against Solo, against Jacob Fatu. I could imagine him hanging out with them for a while and then splitting off. If you can't just have the new Bloodline feud with Jay, Jimmy, Sammy, and Roman. Like, you've got to eventually set something up after that. We talk about what's next after the story arc of what's being presented to us. I trust Paul Levesque's booking that they're, unlike Vince McMahon, they're thinking 6 months ahead. And they sat down, and there's some really good experienced writers in WWE now. They have weeded out the bad ones. And I do believe that there's some really smart people now who know this business and are contributing. And, I hear names here and there every once in a while, and it's like, yeah, this person is part of this successful thing, and they're really smart now. So I say all that because they probably sat down at a meeting and said, what are we going to do when we're done with Jimmy J, Sammy, and Roman, with Solo and Jacob Fatu in particular? They're like, well, Bronson Reed, align him, have him hang out with him long enough, and then we can get a couple pay-per-view matches out of him against them. So anyway, what do you think, Tej?
I just, given how much Joe Tessitore was describing Bronson as a mercenary for the new Bloodline this week, I'm inclined to think that this is going to lean closer to being, we need a body for the fifth man. We need extra ammunition, but he'll be just another kind of ace in the hole that the new Bloodline has moving forward. It's like, we've got an Aussie Godzilla that we can always catch you with the tsunami when you're not looking. I think he'll continue to be a solo act in the near future, which personally is where I love him. Bronson Reed, absolutely dynamite on the mic. He can do so much better than being a heater at this moment. For those of you that haven't seen his work in New Japan Pro Wrestling as Jonah, please go and check that out. Backstage promos are phenomenal. However, I do think it is very conscious having one of the only Samoan guys not part of like the Anoa'i Fatu family orbiting the Bloodline at this moment. I could definitely see them playing into that. They have a lot of foundations to have possible singles feuds once, the Bloodline Civil War blows over. I definitely think you're right about that.
Very good. All right. Lady B says, as someone who grew up, this is a wild card segment when we just go to random chat comments that were made, but we didn't get to. As someone who grew up watching The Miz on The Real World, it is insane to me that he's somehow still playing the same exact character 2 decades later. It's somewhat impressive, yet very sad. This is a guy, hopping in the hot tub during a reality series and being a dork around his female castmates, roommates. It's just like he's the same guy, but he's also 20 years ago the guy you couldn't imagine as a guy in his mid-40s. How does this become somebody in his 40s? And it's like, he's got, bags around his eyes. Now he's showing some age, but he is still like at the core the same person, which is, I don't know if it's sad or not, but it's working for him, as you said, Tej.
I think it's sad on purpose because it's a very different kind of heel heat when
Yeah.
you see this kind of
Yeah.
delusional movie star
Oh, I
type
love the line.
character
The Marine
at age
7 line was
41.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Marine. Oh, this is Marine. Like he's thought his performance with lulling the Wyatt Six into a false insecurity is now means that this means Marine. There's been 6 Marines, I assume, and the 7th is what he's fantasizing about.
Somehow there has.
Yeah,
Somehow there's been 6.
So I'm sorry I jumped in, but I like him like wistfully thinking Marine 7 now it's going to win me that Academy Award.
Yeah. In a way, it's layered the character so much over the years, because what was once you could kind of write off as like a heel that was like young and insolent and like naive about how the world worked, and that's where the heel heat came from. Now it's a guy that feels like he's irrelevant, and it's kind of pathetic, which is a really new dimension to the character. All in kayfabe. Obviously, Mike Mizanin is very comfortable with his life behind the scenes.
That's the thing.
Seems like, but yeah. But I do think it's sad. I think it's sad on purpose. And it is still very impressive that with the perception of what Hollywood is and wrestling's relationship to Hollywood, that he's made that character feel as relevant as he has throughout all the eras he's been around.
If it weren't for his fame and his money, Miz is going to be the greatest dad to his kids until they turn like 12, and then they're going to not want to be seen with him, because he's not going to change. He's not going to adjust as they adjust. Anyway, who knows? But yeah. All right. Standard Deviation just said, Wade, great point. It's not the business is not inherently cyclical. Bookers can't characterize their poor decisions as cyclical without also disowning their good decisions that led to success. Well put. If it's cyclical, it's not just downturns, it's upturns. So if you want credit for the upturn, and then you can't say it's cyclical, it's going to necessarily go down. It necessarily will go down only because by definition, you say about WrestleMania season, why is it always a letdown after WrestleMania? Because you want WrestleMania to feel peak. That's like, if there isn't a downturn after WrestleMania, you failed at WrestleMania. It doesn't mean that you want to minimize the downturn, but of course there's going to be a drop off after Mania because the whole goal is to make WrestleMania the peak moment. Yes. The Super Bowl should feel bigger than Monday Night Football tonight, So, it depends on who's in the Super Bowl. Bills and Chiefs feels big, and, the Lions and Vikings later this year, if we keep doing well, will feel big, but the Super Bowl should ultimately feel bigger. Okay. Jake from Windy City says, do you see the traditional Survivor Series elimination match returning anytime soon, or is it played out at this point? I do think War Games does add some freshness to the Survivor Series PLE. So I say this every couple years, give or take. The Survivor Series elimination match was a concept born out of wanting to put Jim Crockett out of business by putting on a pay-per-view that did not hurt house show business, by putting on the lamest matches possible with the most stars possible. So we're going to come up with a pay-per-view called Survivor Series. We're going to put it opposite of Starrcade to kill Jim Crockett Jr.'s dreams of being competitive on pay-per-view. We're going to be predatory, but then we're going to complain about Ted Turner being predatory 10 years later because we're hypocrites. But yeah, Survivor Series was not meant to be a great concept match. It was meant to be filler. They didn't want to give away, they're in the house show business. They didn't want to give away on pay-per-view a singles matches. So they said, well, let's just put 5-on-5. And the downside to one, it's a weird match concept because it's just a bunch of random tags in and out. And eventually, one team gets eliminated, but then a bunch of people have to do jobs. And so we see how adverse to giving away a bunch of clean jobs Paul Levesque is. So if you do an elimination match, there's going to be countouts, there's going to be DQs, there's going to be interference. It's going to be one bad, lame WWE finish after another. So I'm actually fine with them not doing it. However, I'll take it over a second War Games. I would rather have the women, and the women could stand to do, jobs. And you can do the escape hatch stuff of DQs and countouts and lame finishes just to whittle it down so you don't have all your top stars doing jobs to each other. I would take that over War Games, but it was a concept that was not thought of as, this is great. It was, what can we do that will just fill 3 hours and put Jim Crockett out of business? Tej.
I think, the only thing I have to add to that is I've noticed a lot of the conversation around the War Games stipulation being similar to what the conversation was around Hell in a Cell during the last few years of that pay-per-view, where it feels like the stipulation is constricting the storytelling rather than enhancing it. And, we say what we want about, bookers coasting when things are hot. That was a very conscious change that the Paul Levesque era has made, where it's like inherently gimmicked pay-per-views that cannot be built around a story were adjusted. And I would not be surprised if the same treatment happens for War Games. I don't see it being eliminated entirely, but some kind of tweaking to the format just to keep it fresh. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the future.
All right, another related comment. Junaid says, women's War Games is very forced, but I think this women must have the same matches titles as men comes from Triple H having daughters and Stephanie's influence. Women's division is my favorite, however. What do you think about that? Is this just we don't want to take the heat for not being equal? I saw him, Paul Levesque squirming in his chair when he got asked about the lack of blacks on his most recent pay-per-views, PLEs. He wants to avoid that kind of criticism because he just wants to book, he's a wrestling nerd. He just wants to book good wrestling matches and good storylines and be successful and avoid heat and enjoy his life and enjoy his job. And his, scare with his health, I think, changed his outlook. And so it doesn't mean he wants to not be held accountable, but he wants to avoid controversy. And I think he will. Some people are like, I'm not going to be equal. I'm just going to do it on, quote, merit. And if women deserve it, they get it. If they're not. I think Levesque's personality right now is, how do I avoid a distracting controversy? And therefore, let's do everything equal. However, it helps when you've invested the kind of success. They've had success with their investments that I think is really going to start to pay off in terms of the pipeline of women's talent. I mean, and so this War Games does not feel natural, but the notion of there being a women's War Games that will feel like it's worthy of War Games doesn't feel far-fetched. Just not this year.
Yeah, I mean, it felt perfectly natural last year when Damage Control was a incredible villain for the entire women's division. Yeah,
exactly.
And this bleeds into like how I feel about feminism as a whole. Keeping in mind, everyone, I am a guy, so I do have. I am not the most informed person on the subject, but it feels like
you should mansplain. That's a great thing, right?
No,
I'm joking. Sorry.
I was like, oh wait, no. That's please don't clip that. Anyway,
but
it feels like the evolution of what feminism was, and we saw this with Evolution, the all women's pay-per-view, is the first step is ensuring that the women's division has the same opportunities as the men's division. They have an equal platform, a men's War Games and a women's War Games. But behind that, what people really want is equal investment in the division. A green rookie should be given the same opportunities that their talent affords them, regardless of if they're a man, a woman, or any other gender. And I think we're starting to see that next evolution of the investment being there behind, the two separate platforms. And the next step now is for that to develop a little more organically. If sometimes that means the women get a War Games, the men get a Survivor Series, that's great. If that's what the divisions need, vice versa, that's great. That's what the divisions need. This was a great kind of, I guess, set of training wheels for there to be a higher benchmark for equality between genders. But I think now we've gotten accustomed to that, and the bar is about to be raised again for what the women's division can be, which is a great thing.
Yeah. What you want is to create equality in the presentation that to just about every viewer just feels justified and natural and not part of some sort of, rigging of the system to create equal time, even if, and that's the whole, I don't want to go down that road, but like, that's a whole issue with, a diversity in a workplace. It should be because you realize, I'm going there, that maybe the old boys club doesn't look in all the right places to find the diverse talent that's out there. And so extra effort needs to be made to attract, recruit, cultivate, and eventually build a team that brings all the benefits that come from a team and a workforce that looks like America. But it isn't. It comes from what WWE is doing in terms of let's recruit, let's train, let's build, through NXT, through recruitment, and then NXT, and work our way there. It's a process, and we don't want to embarrass the women by giving them equal time when we haven't invested equal time in making sure they're ready for this stage. And they've had it enough in recent years that people love the women's division, and it absolutely holds its own in a way that it never has in history in, any other American-based, weekly TV show type series. But to give it the type of TV time that they eventually want to get to, which is closer to 50-50 in terms of segments and matches on, it's not just a token match or two on a PLE, but it's like a tough choice. And sometimes there's going to be a show where there's more women's matches than men at some point on a PLE, and it's just going to feel like natural, not some sort of statement being made. Remember in NXT, I loved when Levesque said this. Somebody brought up to Paul Levesque, why do you refer to the NXT women's title as the NXT title? Is that a deliberate thing? Are you now, because you don't call it the NXT men's title? And so he was just like, well, it's not like an edict. It's not going to be consistent, but it's sort of self-evident. We're talking about the women, and it's an NXT title. And you could kind of see his mind thinking it's sort of not patronizing, but it feels weird. It's not weird in a male-dominated 95+% of matches in roster are men, so it's default. It's like there's the NBA, not the MNBA. First of all, it's impossible to say smoothly, so they should never do that. But the MNBA will not exist because the NBA just was around forever, so you add a W on front. Kind of sucks, but they didn't have equal men's and women's leagues to start with, so the one that comes second gets the descriptor. That's kind of with titles. But it'd be nice to be to the point where it's sort of like the Crown Jewel. There's not the Crown Jewel Championship and the Women's Crown Jewel Championship. There's the Men's Crown Jewel and the Women's Crown Jewel because they're both created at the same time. So that's the journey they're on. It's complicated and nuanced, but they're building from the ground up so that when there is equality, it feels natural and not forced. This year, 2 War Games feels forced. Tej, anything to add? You're muted.
I think you said it all. For those of you that have been watching on video, you've seen me aggressively nodding as Wade's been talking this whole time. But I think you've said it perfectly right there.
Cool. All right, a little bit on Rock and how he handles himself. Junaid says, "Hey Wade, Robin Williams, Keanu Reeves, Tom Hanks, you can still be very humble while making $20 million a movie." Ooh, do I have some Tom Hanks stories for you? No, I'm kidding. Let's see. I didn't mean to click. Let's see. Let's bring up Junaid. Rock has likely always been this way, but you shouldn't excuse or have to rationalize his behavior just because how could he not be like this just based on his fame? It's likely more his personality. Okay, Junaid, you're outing me a little bit here. I'm bending over backwards to come across as fair to him in saying who couldn't have that level of success and be susceptible to losing touch with reality. I do think some people are better equipped to handle success well than others. And I think Dwayne Johnson is in the category of people who we're starting to find out isn't handling it with as much grace and class as other people whose personality is better equipped to handle this level of success. So I'm still defending him a bit. I think there's room for someone to be at the core a reasonably good human being who also handles fame poorly and has an ego problem. I don't think that defines him in a way that just disqualifies him from anyone liking him. But I also, he isn't immune to criticism, and he gets it despite his ability to just squash any of us with his money.
I think, I think also just going off of that, right? I do have a little bit more hope that it will be different the next time around because The Rock at the time was coming across after a nearly 10-year stretch of being this infallible star that everybody loved. And for the very first time, his public opinion was really starting to go down. And now it's a little bit more up and down. And we've seen, this is not a Hollywood podcast, but we've seen him being more willing to explore himself creatively. He's portraying Mark Kerr, I apologize, in a movie about the UFC. That is a very, very different role than what we consider a Rock's leading men roles. So hopefully that means he's getting used to having a little bit more of a mixed opinion about him and his career and Dwayne Johnson, the man, and that'll bleed into his attitude when he comes back to WWE eventually. That's what I'm choosing to believe because,
Yeah.
when you're coming off the highs of being adored, it's very easy to get a little insecure. I can see it to a certain degree.
I will say people who were around Rock early on and are around him now or know of him say he's changed, but they're not surprised that he's the way he is. Like there were just, some indications pretty early on, but I think it's beyond my, I don't have thorough enough knowledge to feel like confidence in psychoanalyzing him, but I think there are things that are not serving him well now that served him well early on in terms of being very particular about how he was portrayed, very protective. But I mean, Steve Austin was super protective of himself in a different way, and Triple H had his own approach to protecting his turf. I mean, top guys protect their turf in different ways, but I think there were some signs early on with Rock that this doesn't feel like shocking to people. But we'll leave that for like a book for someone who interviews a lot of people and analyzes it all. All right. Tej, great show. Thanks. Appreciate it. Appreciate our chat room and our emailers. It was a taped Raw, but a good amount happened. Is there anything else you want to sneak in before we sign off?
I mean, only that, I absolutely love doing these. And as WWE continues barreling down the road to Survivor Series, have no doubt that we're going to see some really, really interesting work from pretty much everyone involved. It's crazy to think that almost every feud has something within it that's firing on all cylinders right now. And, you go back, you look at some of the dark days, and my Lord, they were dark. I don't know how
I plug PWTorch.com, our website. We're putting up 5, 10, 20 years ago flashbacks of SmackDown. We even go back 30 years for our Raw reports. And when I read over these before I post them, and I'm, kind of plucking out what the headline's going to be and what graphic to put with it and that kind of thing. And I'm like reading over the stuff. I'm like, oh my God, did this suck compared to what we get to watch now? Like, no wonder they're filling buildings and they weren't back then. I mean, they're just like a lot of bad stuff that WWE's put out there over the years. Mm-hmm. And it's fun. I mean, PWTorch.com, everybody visit it. PWTorchVIP.com is an ad-free version of it for our VIP members. These flashbacks are fascinating. We're doing the 5 years ago Dynamite flashbacks. Impact, it's kind of fun to see who was on the shows 5 and 10 years ago and all of that. So it's, something you see at our website that you might not get on the, kind of the SEO driven, what's going to get us the most clicks with the clickbait headline type stuff, which, I mean, we probably should do more of it to make more money, but I just don't. But when you're done with all that stuff and you get your fix, come settle in for some good writing from a really good team of analysts and just I love the diversity of opinion and the different stages that people are in their fandom and different experience levels of what they've watched. And I think we attract a good team of contributors, and Tej is one of the newer ones and a shining example. All right. Tej, thanks. We'll talk to you soon. Everybody, I mentioned VIP. You can get a 7-day free trial through Spotify or Patreon. If you're a Spotify user, just search PWTorch VIP. Get a 7-day free trial of our VIP shows and the ad-free versions of our free shows. And you can also get a Patreon membership just at patreon.com/PWTorchVIP. The other approach to take, if you want to just get an overview of everything that we offer, including our 35-plus year library of back issues, hundreds of retro radio shows from the 90s, an ad-free website, a weekly newsletter, on-demand access to all our pay-per-view roundtables dating back to 2003, 2004. Get a full VIP membership. Full details at pwtorch.com/govip. pwtorch.com/govip. That includes my the post PLA and pay-per-view roundtables that I host. Todd Martin and Rich Fan usually part of those, and a different mix of people also. So Go VIP people, support what we do. If you made it this far, do you like our brand of covering wrestling and our approach to it, which I think it stands out from a little more of the bombast and whatever else is out there that I hear about it. I don't see a lot of it. If you like what we do, support us. And we'll give you a lot in return for that support. We are a small business dependent upon many of you listening at this point saying, yeah, I like what they do. I like how they approach things. I'm going to subscribe. I feel good about supporting them as opposed to, some other conglomerates out there, wrestling and otherwise, mostly otherwise. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you all next time.